Lowe's knows that no matter your paint project, saving is at the top of your list. That's why when you shop today, you can buy one, get one free select Valspar and HGTV Home by Sherwin-Williams one-coat coverage interior paints via rebate. Shop these deals in-store or online today at Lowe's. We help, you save. Rebate in form of Visa gift card equal to 100% off the second eligible item purchased before or after applicable discounts, if any. See details. Offer ends 7/9.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Attack the Baseline, a WNBA podcast where every episode we attack our baseline knowledge of the WNBA. We're your hosts, John and Kristen Barber, and today it's a bonus episode that we talked about earlier this week on the Connecticut Sun episode. We have our guest, friend of the pod, Matthew, to talk about expansion in Portland and all of the weirdness that's going on there, as well as a discussion about the current CBA and the future CBA negotiations that are going on as a very important part of this league. So I'm very excited to get into all of that. If you'd like to reach out to us and let us know how you're feeling about the show, you can send us an email, attackthebaseline@gmail.com, or connect with us on Bluesky and Instagram at ATBPod. Check out our TikTok, ATBPod. Leave us a 5-star rating and review if you'd be so kind to help us grow the show and get our word out to all the other WNBA fans out there. Now, you're hearing this a couple days after we just finished recording the Sun episode, and this is our bonus episode. So back to you, Matthew. Let's talk about expansion in Portland, which is a city that is very close to you, close to your heart. How are things going in Portland? How are you feeling about the idea of a team coming to your city next season?
Yes, very, very close to me, as in just about 2.5 miles to the city limits from where I am recording to you, coming to you live from right here. I think there's certainly a lot of excitement around. My sister and all of her friends know nothing about sports, and so they've all been talking to me, and they're like, Matthew, you gotta teach us basketball. We're all gonna become WNBA fans. You gotta teach us about basketball. There you go. We come to games with us to explain what's going on. So I think there's certainly a lot of excitement. And I think in general, we're a city that has supported the Blazers fairly well, especially in the 2010s and since. And we've supported our Portland Thorns. The women's soccer team here is the highest attended women's soccer team in the country. So obviously there's support for that here. I think there's a lot of excitement. I think the issues we will see that have been coming in the last little bit here is unfortunately a lot of the same. It's issues that are have plagued a lot of Portland sports, and there's just a lot of chaos and all of that going on. But I think hopefully I'd kind of rather there be chaos now, and you can hopefully get a team in place in time for expansion draft in December and all of these things, rather than there being chaos April of year one, when it's we're trying to play games and no one knows what's going on. There's somewhat of a silver lining there. But there's unfortunately a lot of chaos in regards to basketball in general in this city. The Blazers are finally up for sale, 6 years after they should have been, because, what's her name sucks and wouldn't sell them earlier. Jody Allen. There you go. That's her name.
There you go.
I need to remember the names of the people I'm calling out here. And so like I think that's a lot of what is, also kind of being around here. I mean, one of the issues, you mentioned on the Sun episode about the idea of, it being sort of weird for them to go to Boston unless the Celtics ownership buys them, because then you're going into an arena that you don't own, that you're not the primary tenant, and there's like a weirdness to there. There's a lot of that, I mean, I think that, I'm kind of leading the charge here of trying to get the Bathnals to sell the Kings and, buy the Blazers to be able to have both of their teams play in an arena that they own and that they can kind of be on top of that. Because I mean, one of the issues, speaking of the other team that the Bathnals own in the Thorns, is that I was just at a Thorns game last week, and like you can very clearly tell that they are the tenants in Providence Park there, because the guy who owns the Timbers also owns the field, and he doesn't own the Thorns, and so it's like that would be the same scenario they'd be in here. And it's like I think that that's a little bit of the chaos behind what's going on here, is that it's like, what does the actual situation look like in terms of all of that? The Moda Center, I believe, also is sort of set. Part of what makes the sale difficult and why Jody Allen should have sold the team 6 years ago when she was, legally obligated to, is that the Moda Center is now, needing some renovations. It's been like 10 years since the last round of renovations. And so it becomes difficult that you're coming in and you're agreeing to be a tenant of an arena that not only do you not own, but you at this point don't know who's going to own it, which is why, again, they should just buy it and, avoid that, issue. But, again, I think that's, the chaos behind the scenes is at least partly tied to the chaos behind the scenes of all of Portland sports, which has been chaotic for the last 10 years, I'd say.
But of course, the chaos that you're referring to, amongst other things, that we did learn this week that the upcoming Portland franchise, which we still don't know the name of, which I believe they're expected to announce branding July 15th was the last I heard. The president of the upcoming team was let go by the ownership group, I guess, after only serving a 3-month tenure with the team, which is kind of surprising. Of course, there are a lot of question marks with this team, and now there's going to be another question mark as they're, deciding on a coach, deciding on a general manager, deciding on all these other important hires for this team after you have 10,000 season ticket holders that are deciding to sign up for the upcoming season in Portland. So it was a bit of a jarring news bite. I don't think it necessarily affects the fact that we're still expecting to see them in 2026, but it was just kind of a weird situation. Did you have a take about that?
Well, it's just not the news you expected to hear.
No.
Like the other expansion team in the Toronto Tempo has announced their branding and their names and their GM, their manager for a while now.
Right.
And we believe that was partly by accident.
Right. The leak of their name being visible on the WNBA app or something like that. Very weird situation in Toronto as well.
But still, like it has been out for a long time. So you're just waiting to hear what the branding is going to be, what the team name is. And I guess at this point, people just kind of assume it's going to be the Portland Fire, going back to what the branding was 20 years ago. But it needs some updating, I'm sure. And you just expect, that announcement. You expect to hear who the GM is, who the coach is, and how they're getting ready for the draft, which is going to be in 5 months.
Right. Very, very much around the corner. December, as Matthew said.
It's just all of a sudden like, well, now they don't even have a president who's like in charge of making these decisions. So it was unexpected, to say the least.
Yeah. Very thorny position to be in, without the pun. Do you, I guess, Matthew, do you feel like it's going to be the Fire? Do you think it's going to be the Fire?
I mean, given that that's the only name they've trademarked, I think it would be very out of left field for something else to come. I don't know. I'm not sold on that name. I feel like, I mean, I don't agree with. There's a lot of people who say that it's insensitive due to all the people who are, dying in forest fires. I don't know about that, but I just think to some extent, I feel like you're cutting off your momentum by reviving a team that went out of business because they didn't have fans.
Sure.
It's different. Because I've been talking to people about this, and I feel like I don't like that name for that reason. And people saying like, oh, but like if they bring basketball back to Seattle, it'll be the Sonics again. It's like, well, that's fine because that's a different scenario, right? Like the Sonics left Seattle for lots of reasons that mostly involved around the NBA needing to have a team in New Orleans post Hurricane Katrina, and also issues with the renovations to Climate Pledge Arena at the time, Key Arena. It's like it had nothing to do with the fans, right? Versus the Fire folded large part because there was not real fan support at the time. You know what I mean? And that was a time, also before the big sellout streak. The Blazers were struggling in fan support at the time. It was really a downtime for Portland sports in general. There wasn't support there. It just feels weird to go back to something that was such a failure in that regard, right? I mean, I don't even think it's particularly that great of a name either. And so it's like you're taking this like name that wasn't very good and like remember when we had a team and it was really bad and they only played 2 years and had no fans. It's like I don't know if we want to be thinking about that when we're thinking about all of the possibilities that could be in this team. And like I said, I think that there's a lot to be excited about in terms of potential fan support and all of that. And it's like why remind everybody about the failure that happened here 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Good point.
One more point on Portland here just before we leave, talking about like the weirdness of Inky-san, the president, leaving so quickly also ties into here. It's like she was like such a weird hire in the first place. She came over, she was the chief administrative officer of the NBA Players Association, which is like a wild hire. And so it's just weird to see her. It was weird to see her hired, and weird to see her go so quickly. And so it's one of these things where you look at this and you're like, I don't know why she was hired if she's going to be gone so quickly. It's just like, you don't like the idea she has. Like, why'd you bring in somebody who you knew was going to have these ideas?
Sure.
So like that's just another weirdness about the whole thing.
Honestly, good point. Again, a ton of question marks around Portland. I don't really have anything else to say on the subject. I think we're going to learn more very soon about this team. So we'll be sure to keep you up to date, on Attack the Baseline with all the news that comes out.
This episode brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can get a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help find you options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
But that's one half of what we're here to discuss in this bonus episode. The other half, probably a meatier of a discussion. The CBA. Matthew, you've done a ton of research looking into the CBA, and I'm kind of just going to let you cook here. So I honestly, we've looked in, we've read some of the CBA, but hands off here. Yeah, we'll let you drive. Where do you want to take this?
I just think it's very interesting because we've talked about, on the Sun episode, we talk about here about, how the league really is in a growth phase. I mean, obviously just like literally by the fact that we have an expansion team this year to next year. And what I think is fascinating about this is that as we've seen the growth, we really haven't seen player salaries go up hardly at all. I mean, one of the things that, this current CBA is it has a very stagnant cap. And I think that that's going to be one of the major negotiations here as we move forward is what is the cap going to look like? Where is the spending going to be allowed? And this is something that like I spent a lot of time looking into, because, what people might not realize is that, in the grand scheme of professional sports in this country, salary caps are a relatively new thing. And that one of the things that goes with that is that the salary cap in the NFL, the salary cap in the NBA, and now, the potential salary cap in the MLB are all very much directly tied to revenue sharing. And, that only works, when you have a league that is making lots of money and not in a position where, like the W right now, I think last year it was literally 50-50 in terms of teams making money versus not. And so it's like they're not at a part where, they're making all this money. And so, you need to institute, revenue sharing to make sure that the players are getting paid fairly. It's like, that's like the history of salary caps in other, in the major men's American sports, is it all comes as you implement revenue sharing, which like you're not at the point. And so, a lot of people will come and they'll say like, well, the players don't deserve to make this money because the league's not making money. And I just think that's such like a cop out that people say that doesn't really tie into reality. And the example that I'll say, and this actually ties in something that I did not mention with Portland that I can touch in here, is that you see that all of the teams in the leagues that are good, all the teams that are competitive at all, are spending lots of money. Like you see the teams opposite of what you might think, right? The teams that lost the most money last year were all the teams that were competitive, right? Because they're spending lots of money on all of these things to improve their team, right? They're spending lots of money on coaching staff, spending lots of money on facilities, on all of these things. And, there's no limits, right? Like the league doesn't have a spending cap, right? Like, which, again, I would disagree with, but at least if they had that, that would make some amount of sense to say, we want this league to be profitable now. And so therefore we're gonna have a spending cap. Like, again, that's very short-sighted because you have a lot of potential for growth now. But the issue is that under the current CBA, teams are allowed to spend as much money as they want on everything except for players. And, that like ends up in like a very weird scenario. And, tying into to the Portland team a little bit, I was lucky. I got to tour the new training facility that's been built for both the new Portland WNBA team as well as the Thorns. It's out here on the west side, and it's like very, very cool place. I know the architect who designed it, and it's like that's a cool place. But like one of the things that I thought going in there is that it's like, if I was a professional athlete, I'd much rather make more money than like have the world's greatest gym, and I think that's like a weirdness. It's like the teams are allowed to build the world's greatest gym. They're not allowed to spend more money on players. And I think you end up in like a weird scenario, especially weird as we get into like, the sort of gender equality of it all, that like, Nate Tibbetts is the highest paid person associated with the WNBA team, right? With the WNBA team, right? As the coach of the Mercury. And it's like, there's just like a weirdness to that, right? That like a lot of these, staff members and trainers, they can make lots of money, and, they're, roughly split, 50-50 men and women. And then when you get to players who are 100% women, they're the ones that they say, oh no, there's a cap on how much they can make. And it's like, it's just weird because, there's big gaps in terms of how much teams are spending, but like the players don't get to see any of that. And that's my frustration that I've been thinking about. And so that's why I just think that it's like important to keep in mind as we get into the CBA.
Yeah. And I mean, Neko Gumake, who's the president of the Players Association, has been very vocal about making sure that revenue share is a major part of the upcoming CBA negotiations. And they've been very clear that if their demands aren't met, that they're ready to go into a strike. And we as a WNBA podcast would be very upset if that was the case. Of course, there would be news to talk about as those negotiations would continue, but it's not something that we're hoping for. We do hope that they get what they're asking for, though. And, just to like put it into perspective, as I look at some of the numbers in the NBA, for a player that has zero experience, if they were to sign for a league minimum contract, that is a roughly a $1.2 million contract if they were to sign it for the entire year. And when you look at the WNBA salary cap for an entire team of 12 women, it is $1.5 million. And if you're an NBA player that has 1 year of experience, the veteran minimum ends up being $2 million. So if you've played 1 year in the NBA, you make more than an entire team of professional women's basketball players. And that just simply cannot be where things continue to be in this league that is continuing to grow, continuing to see more viewership, more money for some of these teams. I mean, the Golden State Valkyries are valued at $500 million. Mm-hmm. So there's obviously a problem, and they need to continue to iron that out. And it's not going to be a jump from a salary cap of 1.5 million to a salary cap like the NBA of $200+ million. It's not going to be like that, but you can go 10 times or 20 times and then make sure that these players are adequately paid for all the visibility that they get. And it ensures you that these college players don't decide to stay in college and take NIL money when they should be coming out and joining some of these WNBA franchises. Mm. So a lot of things. Kristen, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I will say, like, obviously there's a problem. I think every single person knows there's a problem. Mm-hmm. All the players, all the coaches, Kathy Engelbert, like, I'm sure even knows that it's a problem. Mm-hmm. So I do just think it's very good timing that the CBA, is up now, right after they had this huge spike in popularity.
Absolutely.
So that is just like, I would think I would just be very thankful if I was a player to be in this exact situation, because there could have been a new CBA in 2023, mm-hmm. and then you'd have to wait. I think the past one was 5 years.
Right.
We'd be stuck like 4 more years waiting in this same situation. Mm-hmm. So it's honestly, like, it's great. And I just really hope that you're right, that the negotiations get to where they need to be. I'm not saying that I would hate if there was a strike. More power to them. I would kind of love that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I hope that the negotiators on the W side take them seriously and will give them what they want. But yeah, I just think it's very good timing. And I just really hope that players are going into this with the mindset that it's going to be better. Like, it's where we are is just where we are right now. It's mm-hmm. literally changing next year. So mm-hmm. let's like do what we can now to make it as good as we want it to be, rather than just like being upset where we are now.
Sure. Right. Put that energy into what it could be. Mm-hmm. And I believe that, when you listen to like Sue Bird and Megan Rapinoe talk about this stuff, Sue as an owner and Megan as a fan, they very much care about empowering these players to get what they want out of these negotiations and not to just like be angry all the time. And, we just continue to hope for the best for them, because when it goes back to revenue sharing, there's clearly a lot of revenue that this league makes that some people don't want to admit. And I just hope it ends up in their pockets, because they deserve it.
Mm-hmm. And again, like I said, like, the numbers are there. Teams are willing to spend money. You just have to let them, and I think that, if, especially, once you bump the cap up, players need, obviously part of that is players need to come and, take and understand, right, that it's like, hey, if you want to make more money, you've got to negotiate for that. And obviously that's going to be a player thing, but it's like, this is not a situation, because the other, CBA negotiations that are happening, this year before next season is the MLB, and the MLB is in a weird situation because there are lots of owners that don't want to spend money. And so you have that issue. I think the W is basically at the point where most of the owners seem willing to spend money, and there's enough demand for people who want to potentially buy a team or, bring it somewhere, that it's like, I don't think you'd have trouble getting these teams sold if the owners say, I don't want to, spend a bunch more money, or we're just going to suck for the next 5 years because we're not going to spend any money. It's like, there's no shortage of owners that are willing to buy in now, and that's why, when I mentioned that the league's, in this big growth phase, it's like, now is the perfect time, like you said, Kristen, to come in and to have the CBA negotiated now, because you're at a position where even the owners understand, like, we're going to spend this money regardless. Like, we'd rather have players that are happy and, making more money than like, well, we're trying to attract free agents by having the best, training practice facility. I'm sure the players enjoy the nice practice facility, but I think they'd enjoy money more, right? And it's like, if the owner can realize, well, I can spend the same amount of money just on salaries, like, and get a happier team and get better free agents and get all of these things. It's like, I think the owners are certainly, willing to do that. And so like I think you said, I don't know when you said this, I forget, but you said that like, everyone kind of realizes what's up. And I think that, that's what's good now. It's like, again, whether the teams are like actually making money right now doesn't matter, as long as you have, willingness to invest in a recognition that in 5 years, in 10 years, the league's going to be in an even better position financially. And that only works if you're willing to pay money. And I think another thing, that you talked about, John, about trying to get rookies in and bring in, another thing that I would like to see personally is an expansion of roster sizes. I've seen that they've said, maybe 14. I mean, I'd like to see all the way up to 15.
Absolutely.
Just as a way to like get players in more, because, it's a weird scenario, where you see some of these players who come to camp and then get cut and then have to like start another job. And then like they get a call like, oh, someone's injured, we need you to come in. And it's like, not everybody can do that. Right. And so it's like, you get some of these players, maybe you come from, more of a privileged background, or, make more money on NIL, that are able to be like, oh, I'm just going to, not start a real job because maybe I'll get called, in the middle of the week to come. And it's like, not every player can do that. And so if you were to go, up to, obviously what the NBA has right now is a 15 active roster, of which 12 start a game, it's like, then you can have these players, these rookies, these, first year players, and be like, we're going to actually pay you to be on the team, and not just, call you up and be like, hey, we need you to come to, practice, tomorrow. It's like, I think that's a way to get more players involved and get, better players, and allow these players to be, on the roster full-time, training with the veterans, as opposed to coming in, they're on in preseason and then they're not back in the building until 2 months later or whatever. It's like, well, that's 2 months of their development that's lost. And, right now it seems like the only way to like be on a roster as a rookie is either like get really lucky that your team only had 11 people they wanted to carry, so they stick you on there, or be like a starter right away. And it's like, I mean, there's, in every sports, you see there's examples of players that don't break out until, year 2 or year 3. I mean, that's another thing that I think is, somewhat good for the players on the Sun, back to our conversation earlier, that they get to play and be practiced and everything, even if they aren't necessarily, wouldn't be good enough to make some of these other teams. It's like, there's a benefit there. And I think that the league would benefit as a whole if you were to, expand these rosters and allow for, and obviously, you'd need to jump the cap up just to accomplish that, much less, jump it up to, encompass everything else. But I think those are the two things that it's like very frustrating for me as a fan watching, some of these players, that it's like, that's something that I think also I'm looking forward to in the negotiation here.
Yeah. I mean, it's so crazy to me that, the draft, we've got 3 rounds of the WNBA draft, and there's a stigma. I don't know if that's the right word, but like second and third round players just don't make teams. Now, there are plenty of examples of second and third round players that have been very good for some of these franchises, even this year, especially. But the fact that even first round picks, you don't see staying on rosters for, in certain cases, more than 2 years. That's just crazy. That's crazy. And it becomes an aspect of, the best players are the ones that stick around. Not shocker, but like there's no wiggle room, because you just want to keep let's say the 144 best players in this case, or whatever it is, with 156 with 13 teams. And there should just be extra spots so that you're not benefiting from a team like the Sun that just has extra room because they're worse than most of the other teams. Like, it shouldn't just be like that, where some of these players are getting lucky because there's just room. They should be protected for at least a couple years to have the opportunity to crack into a rotation, because I'm sure there's a number of players that fizzled out of the W and may have taken their talents elsewhere, but could have been something special in the league that just didn't have the opportunity because there wasn't enough room for them to stay on a roster. That's why you have a player like Dorka Juhas, who was integral to, say, the Minnesota Lynx rotation last year, and she doesn't even come back from Europe, mostly because of Eurobasket, but there's literally not a place for her to be on that Minnesota team because they're so stacked. So it seems silly, but like a couple more spots for these players, or like something that protects them from having to be suspended or cut and re-signed over and over again, needs to be a part of this negotiation as well.
No, that's miserable. Like, that must be just such a roller coaster. Thinking, oh, I made the team. Oh, I made the team. Oh, I got cut. That sucks. And like this year, we're seeing it with Haley Jones, who's been on 3 teams this year.
She's been on 3 teams
for a week, then gets cut, signs on a new team, gets cut. Like, she's even moving around the country every couple weeks. That is crazy. When Haley Jones was a starter last year in Atlanta. Like, that's insane to me. So absolutely, like, the more teams will help, and then they definitely need expanded rosters. I'm also curious if you have any thoughts on adding more games, because I do think we've heard from a lot of players this year. Kelsey Plum the other day tweeted that she is tired. People are shooting slumps because they're just tired. Satu Sabli has said in her press conferences that they're playing so many more games, it feels like, than last year. And there are 4 more games this year in really a more condensed schedule, because last year was the Olympics. I had a whole month off for the Olympics. So I would think that they add more games as there are more teams added. But then you really have to start pushing the season like much more into the fall. But then I don't know how that is going to work with the NBA.
Right.
So that's kind of where it gets tricky, I think, with that.
When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like aloe or skins, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. With Shop Pay, that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts are going abandoned and way more sales happening. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell whatever your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Skins uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is that at some point, I think we're pretty rapidly approaching that. I think you need to have, somewhat of a unbalanced schedule, where you play teams in your conference more, make conferences matter more in that regard, and just be like, yeah, everyone's not going to play every team, but everyone in the East is going to play the same teams, right? And you're competing against them for playoff spots. So it doesn't matter if the West is so much worse and and therefore the West teams have better records. It's like that shouldn't matter, in terms of playoffs. I think that you don't necessarily need to be worried about that. I mean, I think maybe you need to look at something to change for the for the like draft lottery in that regard of you know, trying to make sure that it's not just like, well, you know, the East is so much harder, so the East team has a horrible record, even though they're better than this team in the West. You know, you got to figure something out with that. But I think that's where I would look, is just saying, you know, I think, you know, the schedule, you know, this year is already maybe too much, you know, maybe going back to, you know, how many games they played back when it was just 12, you know, so like, you know, I'd probably start looking at the 2023 season as something to go off of. And I think just like, you know, not worrying about everybody playing everybody and just worrying about like, you know, you have divisions for a reason. Let's make those matter. And does it matter if the best team in the West, it would be, you know, second or third or fourth in the East? That doesn't matter, because there's going to be a West team in the finals, going to be an East team in the finals. And so, you know, that's all that needs to worry about. And I think, you know, yeah, I think you definitely are getting to the point of diminishing returns by adding more games. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really interesting, like you said, the Kelsey Plum tweet where she pointed out where somebody was like, look at like the really bad stretches for all these like good players, and her response was like, yeah, I'm tired. You know, like, and it's like, yeah, at some point, you know, you're gonna get tired. And I mean, obviously there's a lot of travel. It's only gonna get, you know, more as you're, you know, adding, you know, a team in Toronto that's sort of out of the way, and you know, a Portland team that's, you know, obviously like close to some teams, but you know, more further travel for those East teams coming over. And so I think, you know, if you say, hey, you know, yeah, we'll play interconference games from time to time, but the games that, you know, really matter are your in-conference games, because those are the teams that you're going up against, and therefore, you know, you can probably cut down on travel some. You know, if you say, hey, the East teams are, you know, instead of having to go over to the West Coast to play the Sparks and then the Valkyries and then, you know, and then play the Storm and then Portland, and it's like, well, now you're only playing 2 of them every year, you know, away. And so, you know, that's cutting down on 2, you know, cross-country trips for some of these teams. And so I think that like that's definitely what I would start looking at, because again, you know, you could sort of have too much of a good thing in some ways, right? Is that if you know, somebody's going, you say, well, there's more opportunities for fans to come and all these things, but it's like, if fans are coming and their favorite player's not playing because they're hurt or they're resting or whatever, it's like, you know, that's a disappointment in a way that if you just said like, yeah, we're gonna have a set number of games, and you know, if we get more teams, we're just gonna, you know, shuffle around who you play and everything. And it's like, eventually at some point, you know, if you get up to, you know, 16 teams, I think you could even do 4 divisions and really, you know, something like that, you know, sort of like what they do in the NFL, you know, where you're really competing against teams in your division. I think, you know, there might be something there like the, you know, MLB does, where you have, you know, division winners and then wild card teams and conferences or something like that, you know, where schedules don't have to be fair, right? They just only have to be fair in terms of what you're judging against, right? And again, you know, I think you see a lot of this, you know, specifically in the NFL, where they only play 17 games, so it's a little bit less, but it's like, you know, records aren't necessarily indicative of how good a team is sometimes if they've got a really hard schedule. It's like, if they have a hard schedule, their division teams have a hard schedule, right? And so therefore, you know, whether they make the playoffs or not, you know, is an example of like, you know, yeah, isn't necessarily always, are you the best team? No, but it's, are you the best team in, you know, your division? Like, almost always yes, right? Because you're playing all the same teams. And so it's like, you know, sure, the seeding's not always necessarily 100% fair, but you can't get 100% fair. And I think that, you know, that's the issue that the WNBA has right now, is that they're trying to be 100% fair. And it's like, at some point, you know, you're going to be playing, you know, 1 million games. And it's like, that's definitely something to look at as we, you know, dive in here to all the different things that could potentially be negotiated. I think it is tough in some ways, right? Is that if you're trying to get, you know, all these things happen, you know, maybe you're gonna have to compromise on some of them. Hopefully not, because again, I think it's worse. It's worse basketball when the best players aren't playing every week. I mean, again, you know, you see this obviously, you know, in the NBA, where it's much more of an issue of players resting and, you know, load management and stuff. And it's like, that's not good basketball, even though there's more basketball, right? It's like, it's diluting the product. I think you're already seeing some of that now, and you definitely will next year if they don't change, you know, how many games are being played. And I think that there's a recognition that, you know, yes, more basketball is good in abstract, but more basketball isn't necessarily good if the quality is taking a drastic dip. And I think even, you know, you talk about the product being good and the games being fair. It's like, it cannot be fair if your best player gets hurt because of over thing, and you have to spend 2 weeks, and you got hard games when your best player is not playing, and then some other team, their best player's out, and they got easy games, and it's like the schedule's never going to be 100% fair. So let's not pretending it is, which I think is
right.
The argument that the league would make now is like, well, the schedule is 100% fair because everybody plays everybody the same number. It's like, well, it's still not fair, and so let's not pretend that it is and get stuck in some old-fashioned way of thinking on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never going to be a perfect thing. And I completely agree with you. Some of the sentiments about the schedule and, off days and on days, like, I believe there's a certain amount of it being overblown, but yeah, you just have to do your best to, like you said, make it fair from what you're comparing it to. So I hope that is an important part of their negotiation as well. So that you don't have statements like Kelsey Plum saying, I'm tired because of that. But of course, in Kelsey's specific situation, she's now the lead on her team. So I'm sure that's a part of it too. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that could be ironed out. And there's a lot of different ways that they could go with the schedule. If they wanted to split it back into conferences, that would be interesting to me. Or if they're just going to end up keeping it with the same ladder situation that they have now, who's to say? I guess if do you have any final thoughts then on the CBA as we wrap things up here?
Not really, other than a fun fact that I just learned is that the executive director of the WNBA Players Association is Jaren Jackson Jr.'s mom. So that's just a fun fact.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Terry
Jaren,
Jackson,
who's involved in the NBA Players Association pretty closely too. So I guess it runs in the family, huh?
Yeah, he's one of the vice presidents, I think.
Vice presidents, yeah.
That's what they're called. Yeah. So I just learned that. I just was trying to look something up, and I clicked on her page, and it's like, yeah, that her spouse is Jaren Jackson, her son is Jaren Jackson Jr. So there's a fun fact. I guess good on the Jackson family for being in the workers' rights game here.
Yeah. That's pretty sweet.
My overall final thought that I think ties into everything that I've been talking about here is that I think that there's a lot of desire, I think, amongst the WNBA leadership, at the commissioner's office and the ownership and everything, to act like the CBA should look exactly like the NBA CBA does. Mm-hmm. And I just think, the leagues are at such different stages in terms of how long they've been around, how much growth there is, how much potential growth there is, that I think you need to recognize and say there's major differences in terms of how these leagues make money, how they work, where's the growth opportunities, and just to look at that and to say, maybe it doesn't make sense to set our salary cap exactly to what it's like 50% revenue sharing like it is in the NBA, which is like what it is, but it's like these teams, the teams that are good are losing money, whereas all the teams in the NBA make money because it's at a level where it's grown enough. And it's like, the investment needed to grow anything is, like I say, you need to spend money to make money. And I think the owners seem to understand that for everything other than the player's salary somehow. And I just think that there's, you need to look and say 50% revenue sharing makes sense when you're making as much money as the NBA is, when you're making as much money as the NFL is. It doesn't really make sense when you're at a league that, in 20 years, they could be making a similar amount of money to what the NBA is making now, right? Like there's a lot of growth to be happening. And I think, it's good for, for the players in general, that their players association was founded, in their second year of the league existing. And, but the NBA didn't have a players association for like the first 25 or 30 years or whatever of the league existing. And so it's like, there's a lot of different history, but it's like, you can't copy paste as much as it, think, oh, basketball league, therefore basketball league, CBA makes sense. And it's like, well, no, it's a, basketball league that's, 80 years old versus a basketball league that's 25 years old. So there's an investment that needs to happen. People don't understand that it's like, you can't just expect a 25-year-old league to be the same as an 80-year-old league. And I think that you need to find that balance, and you need to find, the balance of how can we invest in every part of the team and not everything except the players, which is what it is now, which is just like, again, so crazy when you realize that it's, in some ways, if the CBA goes really well, it could be a really positive thing for the growth. And if it, ends up, being bad and the players are pissed off and unhappy, it could be really negative, because I think, they see that there's money to be made elsewhere, right? Whether it's, going overseas, or it's something like Unrivaled in the off season. It's like when the players are making more money doing that stuff, you're like, something's wrong here. Right. And it's like, the fix is actually, relatively easy, is that if you don't want to just like totally get rid of the salary cap, because I would look at like, something you could borrow from like F1, which is where they have a spending limit, right? Where all the money, there's a spending cap, and, whether you spend that money on, getting the best mechanics, or you spend the money on researching for your car, it's like, it all goes there. It's like, that would, I think, maybe be better than just having a salary cap at all. It's like, obviously, pumping the salary cap up would solve it, but it's like, you look and you say, you want, they're willing to spend, X amount of money. Like, why don't we just say, you could spend that money, you could spend it on whatever you want, right? And if you want to have a very high payroll, great. If you want to have, the best coaches, great. Like, you can choose what you want to spend. I think that would almost sort of be a way to be like, let's get the, potentially get the players as much money as possible and find out, and not just, limit it. But, a bump in the salary cap would also, accomplish similar goals, but I don't know.
Kristen, any last thoughts about the CBA as our ladies go and fight for their rights?
Yeah. I'll just say, like, perhaps this is one situation where it's like good that there's all these billionaires out there who are just like, yeah, whatever, I'll invest tens of millions of dollars in this WNBA team. And that like really doesn't make much of a difference in their overall wealth.
Yep.
But then they're willing to do it. So good. That's a positive.
Right. Yeah. The willingness for these rich guys to spend this money should be at least adequately reflected on
like, and it seems like they want to, like, they recognize how much of an investment this is,
right,
and how quickly it's increasing in popularity. Now they'll just become richer and richer, and like, that's what it is.
There's a problem there. Yeah.
But at least where we are now, I'm glad that people are willing to make the investment.
Yeah, a lot of things to be negotiated, and that's why I feel like we don't hear a lot about the subject on a day-to-day. We hear it in these blasts, and whenever Kathy has an opportunity to speak in front of the media, we hear, negotiations are ongoing. And I just hope that, we're seeing positive progression with that whenever the next update is, because it's going to be due soon. And again, if not, to bring it back to the point, we could be staring at a WNBA strike, and that could go a million different ways. So, Matthew, thank you so much. I just want to say thank you for doing your research here, and all the ideas that you had on how they could make changes here and make this, a league that is more correctly represented in their CBA. So, just thank you so much. And thank you for coming on the pod.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's, I think everyone in my life is very happy that, I get to shout all this at you and not just, shout at them and be like, oh, let me tell you about the WNBC. Be like, everyone in my life's like, I don't care. But hopefully your listeners are people who do care, so they can hear my crazy rants about all this.
No, they absolutely do care. Like, I know that this is a big topic of conversation, and I'm glad that we've got a place to discuss it now in as much detail as it should be discussed. Well, we'll sure to have you back on once we have more details about Portland, or once Portland gets ready to launch into the WNBA coming 2026.
Yeah.
And I'll just remind you that if you would like to reach out to us and send us an email, you could do so at attackthebaseline@gmail.com. Connect with us on Bluesky, Instagram, TikTok at ATBPod. And looking forward to hearing with you. Thank you again, Matthew, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. A lot of fun.
And Kristen, I'm staring at the baseline. What are we going to do?
Attack it.
Attack the baseline. Thank you so much for listening. And we'll be back next week with more WNBA news and stuff.